place now without Saddam?
Well, it's certainly not a much better place for the United States without Saddam. He may have been very criminally oriented toward his own people, but Yosri, as long as Saddam ruled Iraq, the forces that are around and or led by Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan and Pakistan were not going to come westward. They weren't going to be bothering Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Israel. And once we took him out, we took the cork out of the neck of that bottle. And I think, as you see in the Levant countries now, the growth of Salafi jihadism is significant. And I would say that the pro-Israeli neoconservatives around President Bush, who forced the war on Iraq that removed Saddam, ultimately will have signed Israel's death warrant, because in many ways Saddam was the most important bulwark to protect the Israelis against Sunni militants. They could handle the Palestinians, but with the arrival from the South Asia area of Sunni Salafi militants, Israel just has a nightmare coming its way.
I will come back to the issue of Israel, because it's a very important and a very crucial issue, not only for us in the Middle East, but perhaps also in one sense or another to you personally. But I would like to relate to you what Mike Sheehan, who was in charge of counterterrorism at the State Department at one point, especially during the attack on USS Cole. He mentions one incident. I'm not sure which opportunity would that be from the missed opportunities which you talked about. He says, I remember very specifically at one time trying to move a naval warship into the Indian Ocean so that we could shoot a missile when we spotted bin Laden in Afghanistan. Let's attack this guy. Obviously, he shares a lot with you, Mike Sheehan. You wanted this for this to happen.
Very much so, sir. In fact, there were U.S. naval vessels stationed in the Indian Ocean and available to do that. The time I talked about was one time they could have hit him with cruise missiles. There was another time when he was in the desert in Kandahar hunting bustards with falcons with some princes from the United Arab Emirates, and we could have killed him at that point. But Mr. Clark at that point called the Emiratis and told them to get out of the desert, and so we lost the opportunity to kill bin Laden. But I agree with Mr. Sheehan. The only thing that was missing, the only reason Osama bin Laden is alive today is because of President Clinton, his security advisor, Sandy Berger, and Mr. Richard Clark.
Why would he do such a thing? I mean, was that because the man, Mr. Clark, strikes me and strikes a lot of people as very professional?
Oh, he's very professional at protecting the president, and that's what his job is. I think, to be fair, part of their problem was they continue to believe, as Mr. Bush's administration believes, and as Mr. Obama's administration believes, that Osama bin Laden and what he represents is a small group of criminals who are in no way related to Muslims or to Islam, and a group that is really very small and hates Americans for who they are and what they believe. They don't want to admit that bin Laden and his allies are attacking us because of what the U.S. government does in the Muslim world. And so they don't take them very seriously, sir.
Another thing that Mr. Mike Sheehan would share with you is the point that nobody really listened to bin Laden, although he is very much forthcoming. He speaks his mind. And once I asked you, when there's a tape out there on television. What happens inside the CIA? Why don't you remind us what happens inside the CIA when Bin Laden releases one statement or one tape or another?
Well, within the agency itself, Yosri, within the people who were working against al-Qaeda, they would pay close attention to what Osama bin Laden says, because there's a very close correlation between what he says and what al-Qaeda does. But the senior officers were always much more interested, and the White House was much more interested in how he looked. Did he look sick? Was he wounded? Was there any sign of a kidney disease on his skin coloring? It was really amazing to me, because in Osama bin Laden, the United States has an enemy who wants us to understand what this war is about, what anger he represents in the Muslim world, and what he intends to do about it. But in my experience, through 2004 at least, people dismissed his words as, well, in the United States media, they're called rants or ravings or diatribes or insane talk. And so we never paid much attention to what he said, unfortunately.
Yeah, you know, I'm fascinated by the idea that you are fascinated by the character, the very character of Osama bin Laden and what he represents. Until today, and ever since I've known you after you came out of service, 6 or 7 years now, I believe, you always speak of bin Laden very highly and in a very respectful tone. It's I don't know if sometimes I wonder how this will, you know, make you look in your own country and even in our own region.
Well, I view Osama bin Laden as a very worthy enemy. He's the son of a multi-billionaire's family. He has chosen to live in Afghanistan and Sudan for the last 25 years. He has been wounded in combat. He has been a combat engineer. He's an eloquent speaker who obviously has an impact in the Muslim world. If you look at the number of Islamist-oriented insurgencies that are occurring today and compare them to what there was in 1996, he has to have some share in inspiring that. And unlike all American politicians and leaders, he tries to, it seems to me, match his words and his deeds. I just finished, Yosri, a new book for Oxford University Press that is a biography of Osama bin Laden based on what he's said. So I'm hoping that at least at some point, Americans will begin to understand that this man needs to be defeated. He needs to be killed. But he cannot simply be dismissed as a madman.
Where is he now? Mike, where is Osama bin Laden now?
Where is he now? I would suspect, Yosri, that he is in somewhere on the border, near the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, north of Jalalabad, on the side of Afghanistan, it would be Nuristan or Konar. In Pakistan, it would be in the Bajur Agency. It's a place that is amongst the most remote, probably the most remote in the region. It is the place he wanted to go in 1997 before he was invited to go to Kandahar by the Taliban regime. And it's also a very religiously conducive place for him. The Saudis and other Salafi missionaries have been very active in that region for the better part of 20 years. And so in that way, it's very conducive for him. That's just my guess, Yosri. I have no way of knowing one way or another. But if I had a chance, that's where I'd be looking.
We surely can, to a certain extent, imagine that it is relatively difficult to get to bin Laden al-Zawahiri if he is indeed there in the same area with him or near him. But there's another major question. Does the United States of America really want to get hold of bin Laden?
You know, I don't know the answer to that anymore. First of all, I don't work in the U.S. government anymore. I'm very sure that at the CIA, they're still intent on trying to find and kill him or capture him, especially since their officers were killed by an operation from Al-Qaeda in Host last December. But again, Yosri, Bin Laden is just, in the United States and in the West generally, we don't regard him with much respect at all. We think he's a madman, and somehow we can just win this war without accounting for him. And I think the U.S. forces in Afghanistan at the moment and NATO forces are so small, and they're getting beaten by the Taliban in the south. The insurgency is spreading to the north, that there's really very few resources left to go after Osama bin Laden in any systematic way. They kill a few people with the drone now and then, but that's never going to win. That's not a war-winning weapon at all.
I don't know what it makes you feel like to know that Osama bin Laden himself refers to you by name. Because back in September, actually exactly on September the 7th, in the year 2007, bin Laden said in one of his statements, if you, he's speaking to the Americans, if you want to understand what's going on, and if you would like to get to know some of the reasons for you losing the war against us, then read the book of Micheal Scheuer in this regard. Did you pay him to say this?
No, I didn't, and I don't know. I think you can imagine, Yosri, that didn't win me many friends in the United States.
I can imagine.
Especially in the pro-Israeli community.
Yeah.
But I think all that bin Laden meant, I think bin Laden must be very frustrated with the West in that they're not listening. We're not listening to what he says. In my book, all I did was simply try to explain to Americans the motivation of our enemy, and which is exactly what Osama bin Laden has tried to do over the past 14 years now, which is to say, you know, we don't care what you do in North America. If you have women in the workplace, if you drink beer, if you have elections and democracy, that's fine. What we're at war with is what you do in the Muslim world. Your support for Arab police states, your support for Israel for whatever it wants to do, your presence on the Arab Peninsula, your military presence in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, in Yemen and Mindanao, your ability to acquire Arab oil